most Christians see a rainbow and think it's either a pretty promise from God or they've gotten used to the culture claiming it's something else entirely. But the rainbow was never culture's property to redefine. God put it in the sky first after the flood, and he had something very specific and very powerful in mind once you dig into the rainbow, the imagery, and everything else that goes with it. If we let counterfeit versions steal the original meaning, we're missing one of the clearest, most beautiful pictures of the gospel in all of Scripture. I know that might sound pretty intense right out the gate, and some of you are probably already thinking, here we go, another guy making the rainbow about politics. But hear me out for the next 30 seconds, because what I'm going to show you goes deeper than what just Genesis chapter 9 and what it shows you and how it contrasts all the way out throughout the cross, through the gospel, which changes how you see the ark in the sky forever. In this episode of Biblically Literate, I'm going to walk you through the real story of the rainbow in Genesis chapter 9, show you three things most Bible readers completely miss about why God chose that sign and what it was really pointing to, explain how the enemy has always tried to counterfeit what God creates, and then show you exactly why this matters for your family, your conversations, and your own personal walk with Jesus today. If you keep treating the rainbow like a generic symbol of no more bad stuff is going to happen to us, you're missing the retired weapon of judgment that points straight up to mercy and ultimately to the cross, which is so much more of a beautiful picture than what culture and things like that try to tell us today. So first, let's dig into what it actually says in the Bible. After the flood waters recede, you most likely know the story of Noah. Noah and his family stepped out onto dry ground. God did something remarkable. He completely restarted humanity. He gave them the same basic command he gave Adam and Eve. He said basically, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. But now it came with new instructions in a brand new covenant. God told them they could now eat meat, but with one important rule. They were not to eat the blood because the life is in the blood. It says he established he established a system of justice for taking human life, and then he made a promise that has never been broken. Let me read you the heart of it all from Genesis chapter 9, starting in verse 12. This is God speaking to Noah here. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Remember that word there, bow. That's going to be important later on. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, talking about the rainbow here, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Now, most of us have heard kind of the surface level version in response to the LGBTQ community using the rainbow and totally, they'll totally try to make it make sense and try to say, oh, this, that, and the other. It's for all colors, everything. And I'm not knocking at people who have tried to argue against it, which is kind of a surface level thing. It's absolutely true that God put a rainbow in the sky as a promise that he would never flood the whole earth again. That's completely true and nothing we need to dispute there. But there's so much more going on in this part of the story. I guess you could say the story arc, right? With this arc of colors. Here's the first thing most people miss. You see, in the ancient world, the word translated bow, as you saw here, and this didn't mean a pretty rainbow. It meant a warrior's weapon. The bow you used in battle, right? When God says, I have set my bow in the clouds, he's using picture language here. He's using, he basically saying that he's hanging his war bow up. He is no longer using this against humanity. The judgment of the flood waters are over. The weapon that brought destruction is now retired and placed in the sky as a sign of peace. The modern tradition of hanging up your bow, if you're from a hunting family or something like that, you probably know this. Hanging up your bow signifies completion, peace, and laying down one's weapon after a long journey. When a hunter hangs their bow on the wall, over a fireplace, whatever it might mean, for the final time, it's not an act of defeat. Instead, it's a peaceful declaration that their time of pursuing game has successfully ended. The weapon is no longer needed for the struggle of the hunt. So it is placed in a visible spot to honor past memories and signal a transition into a quieter, more reflective season of life. This modern sentiment is almost directly mirrors the rainbow in Genesis chapter 9. Now notice that the rainbow is aimed upward into the heavens, pointing away from humanity. This positioning symbolizes that the conflict between the creator and the created, so the creator and the earth, people who inhabit it, has ended, establishing a lasting covenant of peace, to basically a promise, an agreement of peace. Just as a retired hunter hangs their bow on a wall to signal that the hunt is over, the rainbow serves as a universal symbol that the weapon has been laid down, replacing judgment with a promise of safety and peace for all living things. That rainbow is God's battle bow being retired. But there's a second layer most readers never catch. That same rainbow shows up again later in Scripture around the very throne of God. You see, in Ezekiel chapter 1, the prophet gets a vision of God's glory, and he describes this way. Around the throne there was something that looked, quote, like the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day. It's same imagery as Revelation chapter 4. The rainbow is part of the visible glory of God himself. You see what's happening here? Do you see it? God didn't just invent a nice symbol after the flood. He took something that already belonged to his own glory and made it the sign of his covenant with creation. The rainbow has always been connected to who God is, his majesty, his justice, and now, after the flood, his mercy. And that brings us to something that we have to talk about honestly. And when we know this, completely changes how you see evil and discern what is good and what is not. You see, the enemy, we often call him Satan, has always tried to counterfeit what God creates. He is not a God or as powerful as God. He cannot make anything. He's not a creator. He cannot create. Satan cannot create anything new because because he is a creature. He is created, not the creator. Only God has the unique power to create life, matter, and beauty out of nothing. Because Satan lacks this divine power, he can only take what God has already made and twist and corrupted or counterfeit it, I guess you could say. His power is limited to deception, temptation, destruction, meaning he cannot invent new things, but he can only ruin the good things that already exist if others work for him to make that happen. This inability to create connects directly to his origin story as a fallen angel, originally named Lucifer. We think possibly named Lucifer. He was created by God as a beautiful and powerful angel, but he became proud and wanted to be equal or higher than God because he wanted God's status without having God's ultimate power to create. His rebellion failed and he was cast out of heaven. His role as the leader of worship in heaven is now become a corrupter, reflecting his persistent limitation. He is forever trapped in a state of jealousy, trying to damage God's creation because he can never make a creation that is his own. Long story short, Satan can only take what God made good and twist it for his own purpose if he has people that follow him and work for him. So when God creates absolute truth, Satan counterfeits it with deception. When God creates unconditional love, Satan twists it into lust and selfish desires. When God creates genuine humility, Satan offers destructive pride. Every counterfeit in the world depends on the original that God already made. Evil has no creative power on its own. It only imitates and corrupts. J.R.R. Tolkien understood this deeply in his stories. In Middle Earth, evil never invents anything truly new. The orcs are corrupted elves. The Dark Tower is a twisted mockery of true order. Sauron cannot create life. He can only ruin and enslave what already exists. That's not just good fantasy. That's a biblical reality. The rainbow is a perfect example of this because God created it as a sign of his covenant mercy, a retired weapon of judgment, now pointing upward as a reminder that he remembers his promise. But the counterfeit version takes that same symbol and turns it into a celebration of self-expression and identity apart from God. It's the same strategy the enemy has used since the garden. Take what God made and twist it into something people forget the original, because remember, Satan doesn't need you to know who he is. He just needs you to forget how good God is. And we see how good God is when we look at the direction of the bow. It's not set in the clouds and arches across the sky pointing down on us. When we see a rainbow, the ends are pointed downward toward earth, but the arc itself is rising upward. In the ancient mind, a bow was aimed at a target. Obviously, everybody knows. It wasn't just the ancient times that it happened, but obviously that was something they knew back then. God's bow in the sky is aimed upward. This isn't an accident, and I promise I'm not crazy for pointing it out. It's a visual prophecy. One day, sin would again deserve judgment, but instead of the arrow of God's wrath shooting down on us, it would shoot upward and land on Jesus on the cross. The bow of judgment was redirected from those who truly deserved it. The covenant sign itself was preaching the gospel before Jesus ever came. That's why every episode we do here on Biblically Literate drives everything back to the cross. The Noahic covenant is real. God has kept his promise. No worldwide flood since, but it was always pointing forward to a greater covenant, sealed not with a sign in the sky, but with the blood of Christ. The rainbow pointing upward into the sky provides a direct answer to the difficult question why a loving God would flood the earth. While the flood story shows God who is deeply saddened and angered by human cruelty and wrongdoing, the rainbow shifts the entire focus from human punishment to divine sacrifice. Why would a God, flood the entire earth? Well, why would a God sacrifice himself for those who are not worthy? You see, by aiming the battle bow upward toward heaven rather than downward toward humanity, the story visually demonstrates that God is choosing to redirect his target of his own weapon. The specific positioning means that if the bow of judgment were ever to be fired again, as it was, the arrow would strike God himself rather than the people. This symbol serves as a direct preview of Jesus dying on the cross. Instead of wiping out humanity a second time for when people do wrong, God chose to take the ultimate penalty upon himself. The upward pointing rainbow shows that God answered the problem of human evil, not by destroying the world again, not by going out there and just destroying it, saying I should have never made this again, but by allowing himself to absorb the pain and the punishment for it. Listen, if you're a dad or somebody with young kids like I am, your children are seeing rainbows everywhere right now, right? They just got done with Pride Month, and they're probably seeing them everywhere right now, on flags, maybe even in schools, in cartoons, in stores. They're being taught a version of the story that leaves God out of it completely. You have a responsibility to tell them the real one, not in an angry, argumentative way, but with clarity and quiet confidence. Say something like, next time you see a rainbow outside, hey buddy, that rainbow is actually really old. God put it there after a huge flood to show he would never destroy the earth that way again. And it even points to how Jesus would die for us. That's the kind of conversation that sticks. The root issue for a lot of us in this season of life is prideful isolation. We get busy with work, we commute, kids, sports. We slowly stop having the hard conversations, even with our own families. We let the culture's version of the story become the default because it's easier than swimming upstream. But that's not spiritual leadership. Dads, that's not our answer. That's just drifting. God didn't hang that bow in the sky so we could stay quiet while while his sign gets redefined. He hung it there as a reminder of his faithfulness and as a call to remember who he is. And if you know what that rainbow actually means, and it actually means something to you, you can't help but share what it actually means to your kids, to your family, and to those that you're closest to. Really, just anybody that you know, right? So, what do we actually do with this? First, know the story yourself. Read the first half of Genesis chapter 9 this week with fresh eyes. Notice the warrior bow language. Notice how it connects to God's glory in Ezekiel. Read Ezekiel 1. Notice the direction it points. Let it preach the gospel to you again. Second, teach it to your kids, not as a lecture, but as part of family worship, bedtime talks, next time you see a rainbow in the sky. Kids remember stories, especially when you connect them to the cross. Third, don't be afraid to gently correct the counterfeit when it comes up. You don't have to pick fights, but when someone says the rainbow belongs to a certain movement or a certain people group, you can kindly say, actually, God created that sign thousands of years before any of us were born. He still points to it today. And finally, check your heart. Where have you let a counterfeit version of something good replace what God has actually designed? Maybe it's your identity, success, comfort, or even a view of masculinity or leadership. The enemy doesn't need you to become something brand new. He just needs you to forget the original. He just needs you to forget how good God is. The good news is this. The same God who hung his bow in the sky after the flood is the God who sent his son to take the judgment we deserved. A bow really does point up. Mercy really is available. Not because of the righteous things or the good things that we do, but because of his mercy. And the covenant really is everlasting because it's held by Jesus. If you want more honest Bible teaching that gives you the real story behind the stories with context, connections, and zero fluff, like and subscribe to Biblically Literate with me, John Rhodes from First Christian Church. Drop your takeaways in the comments. What's one thing you learned about the rainbow today that you didn't know before? Let me know in the comments down below. Appreciate you being here. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.